All right, let's just dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to methodically untangle the logical leaps, the linguistic gymnastics, and, honestly, the blatant intellectual dishonesty that gets used to secure theological victories in modern interfaith debates. We live in this world where ancient, deeply sacred texts are often just reduced to rhetorical weapons. And today, we're going to look closely at exactly how that happens, specifically focusing on things like historical gerrymandering, linguistic manipulation, and selective, sometimes completely fabricated citations. To really set the stage, let's start with a chaotic, real-world quote pulled directly from an interfaith debate transcript. This shows just how incredibly hostile and ego-driven these discussions can get. I mean, imagine two grown adults literally screaming at each other over the grammatical structure of a 2,000-year-old Aramaic word. You have someone actually declaring a mic drop in the middle of a serious discussion about ancient history. It is wild, and frankly, it's just debate theater. So, you might be wondering, how did a 2,000-year-old text turn into this modern debate theater? Now, before we go a single step further, I want to establish a very clear ground rule for our time together. We are entirely neutral here. We are objectively analyzing the rhetorical maneuvers used in these clashes. We aren't here to endorse Judaism, Christianity, or Islam as the correct faith. Our goal is to expose the architecture of a bad faith argument. We want to see how ancient texts get weaponized and exactly where debaters stretch facts to fit a predetermined conclusion. Okay, Section 1. Setting the board, the high-stakes prophecy. To really understand the stakes here, we first have to look at the foundational prophecy that everyone is fighting over. You'll find it in the biblical book of Daniel, specifically chapters 2 and 7. The text describes King Nebuchadnezzar's dream of this massive statue, which represents 4 consecutive worldly empires. Early commentators broadly agreed that Daniel's vision predicted Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and finally Rome. Rome is represented by iron legs, which eventually divide into feet of iron mixed with clay, meaning it becomes a fractured, divided kingdom. But here is the crucial part. The prophecy states that after this division, an eternal 5th kingdom is going to be established by God. And as you can probably guess, every major faith desperately wants to claim their movement is this 5th kingdom. Which brings us to Section 2, Tactic 1, Historical Gerrymandering. The very first major rhetorical trick we encounter is the artificial manipulation of timelines. It's essentially historical gerrymandering. Notice how a super rigid timeline gets used as a trap here. In the transcript, an Islamic apologist strictly limits the prophecy's timeline. They argue that because Rome officially divided in 395 CE, the prophetic window for that 5th kingdom doesn't even open until after that year. Because of this totally arbitrary cutoff, they argue Jesus is automatically disqualified because he lived 350 years too early. Instead, they point to the Islamic Caliphate, which arose after 395 and eventually dismantled the remnants of Rome by taking Constantinople way later in 1453. But the Christian debater pushes back hard against this neat little chronological box. They point out that Rome's fall wasn't just a single, tidy event you can easily pin to a calendar date. It was a massive, messy, centuries-long disintegration. You had Germanic tribes sacking Western Rome, Bulgarians shattering Byzantine identity in the East. It was chaos, not a neat narrative. And this brings up a brilliant analogy that exposes the gerrymandering tactic perfectly. The Christian debater argues that the predicted kingdom is a worldwide spiritual movement, not a political empire. By demanding that God's eternal 5th kingdom must be a literal, geographic, 7th century military empire that conquers very specific GPS coordinates, well, you're just changing the rules mid-play. It's like prophesying a great leader will arrive, but artificially narrowing the criteria so they must drive a 2008 Honda Civic. You rig the definition so that only a physical empire could possibly fit, automatically disqualifying any spiritual kingdom from the jump. Let's look at Section 3, Tactic 2, Linguistic Illusions. Now, if debaters are willing to gerrymander centuries of messy history into a neat little box just to win an argument, you better believe they will do the exact same thing to ancient languages. Language gets heavily weaponized. We see this build into what is essentially a phonetic illusion. In Daniel 7 verse 22, the original Aramaic word for judgment is dina. The Islamic apologist playfully asserts that this actually represents God pronouncing his deen, which is the Arabic word for the religion of Islam. But hold on, this is a classic Semitic root fallacy. Yes, Aramaic and Arabic are linguistic cousins, they share root consonants, but while the Arabic deen evolved to mean religion, the Aramaic dina means a court verdict or a legal decision. So effectively, the debater is conflating a shared linguistic root with an identical definition just to score a cheap phonetic point. The crucial point here is understanding the actual grammar of the text. Daniel 7 is describing a heavenly court session where the Ancient of Days is handing down a legal ruling in favor of persecuted people. If you forcefully apply the Arabic definition of religion to this specific Aramaic grammatical structure, the whole chapter turns into utter nonsense. Seriously, translating that root in verse 10 yields the grammatically impossible phrase, "the religion sat down." It completely abandons all logic. Every single word in these debates is heavily contested, especially when they're trying to identify the mysterious figure called the Son of Man. Daniel 7 says all nations will serve, or palak in Aramaic, the Son of Man. Christian debaters argue palak implies strict divine worship, pointing to Daniel 3, where Hebrew boys famously refused to palak a golden idol. But then, the Islamic apologist counters by pointing to the book of Ezra, where palak describes temple servants literally just sweeping floors. They argue it can just mean secular reverence for a human prophet. It is a microscopic battlefield, with these guys fighting over absolutely every syllable. To claim the Son of Man title for the Prophet Muhammad, who, by the way, doesn't share the Davidic bloodline required by Jewish and Christian traditions, the apologist uses a really clever rhetorical bypass. They point out that Cyrus the Great, who was a pagan Persian king, was called God's anointed or Messiah simply because he did God's will. Therefore, they argue, Muhammad could also be an anointed messenger without the bloodline. But come on, this conflates a temporary, mortal, earthly instrument like King Cyrus with the very specific figure in Daniel 7. The text explicitly describes this figure riding on the clouds of heaven. In ancient literature, that is imagery exclusively reserved for the divine. Plus, he receives an indestructible, eternal kingdom. It's a false equivalence, plain and simple, designed to blur the clear lines of the text. Moving on to Section 4, Tactic 3, the fabricated citation. So, blurring the lines of the text is one thing, right? But the hostility reaches its absolute peak when intellectual dishonesty turns into literally making up evidence in real time. In the transcript, there's this incredible moment where the Islamic apologist, trying forcefully to prove his premise, confidently cites the famous medieval Jewish commentator Rashi. The apologist claims, on the record, that Rashi says the Son of Man in Daniel 7 is worshipped as a divine figure, and he says it with total unwavering conviction. But the Christian debater immediately calls his bluff and forces them to actually pull up the text on screen. And when we look at the actual text from Rashi, it is revealed that Rashi said the exact opposite. Rashi wrote that the figure of the Son of Man collectively represents the nation of Israel compared to a humble man, in contrast to those beastly pagan empires. And the nation of Israel is certainly not worshipped as divine by the Jewish people. The apologist confidently invented a citation, got caught red-handed, and immediately tried to pivot. This frantic scrambling exposes the sad reality of these interactions. This debate isn't an honest pursuit of truth, not at all. It is a zero-sum game of rhetorical gotchas totally manufactured for social media algorithms. The debaters know this isn't going into an academic journal. They are weaponizing ancient grammar just to manufacture a 10-second viral clip where they look like the winner. It is the absolute prioritization of a mic drop over actual textual veracity. Finally, Section 5, the ultimate irony. When we take a step back from all the shouting, the linguistic manipulation, the fabricated quotes, and the endless, exhausting battle over which empire conquered what, there is a profound, almost tragic irony in what these debaters are actually fighting over. Think about the actual origins of the title they're fighting so viciously to claim. Son of Man, Ben Adam in Hebrew, Bar Enosh in Aramaic. Long before it was a majestic, apocalyptic title in the book of Daniel, this exact phrase was used throughout the Psalms and the book of Ezekiel as the ultimate symbol of human lowliness. It was a symbol of frailty, of mortality, of the literal dust from which humanity was made. It was fundamentally designed to remind us of how incredibly small and limited we are compared to the divine. It was a phrase explicitly meant to humble us. And isn't it wildly ironic that modern debaters use manipulation, unchecked ego, logical fallacies, and literal screaming matches to claim a title of humility? You have theologians fighting tooth and nail to prove their supreme dominance over one another, using a symbol of dust. So we have to ask, has the violent, ego-driven fight to claim the title completely destroyed the humility it was originally meant to represent? It's a really critical question to ask ourselves the next time we see someone prioritizing a flashy mic drop over the actual truth. Keep your eyes open and don't let the volume of the speaker distract you from the emptiness of the claim. Until next time, keep learning.